Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Down to Business. Talking all things property today. Pretty excited about this one. You know, it's something that, well, not just Australians, but many Australians have a love affair with and love it as an investment class. So, who better to speak today than Gavan Reynolds? He's got his fingers in a lot of property pies. You know, multiple businesses, but been around the game for quite a long time. I mean, can't tell with his age, obviously, but I'll let Gavan go into that a bit more. But you know, from a point of view of where we come across Gavan in Reynolds Auctioneers, you know, auctioneering business, property consulting, all things from high net wealth people, business owners to mums and dads that really are looking to get in that property game through Reynolds Property, and more recently, Pure Property Group that focus on not being everything to everyone, but really looking after good management of assets of property. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in more detail. But as you can see, quite a cross section, and I'm sure we'll get a lot out of this from not only investment and I guess how to help people, but also turning a passion into a business. You know, so I'm sure we'll learn a bit more. And one other thing, a bit of a side, I guess, inside is that an avid car racing fan and driver participant. So we'll talk about that a bit more. But welcome, Gavan.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure. And I mean, maybe I've touched at a high level. You know, you have been around property for a long time.
Yes.
You know, how did this start from being a passion and some of the experience you've got to where you are today?
So if we go back to my earliest recollections of being interested in property, I can remember there was a Chinese restaurant up the road from where we lived in Sydney at the time. I grew up on the northern beaches of Sydney. Then we moved up to the Newcastle area around sort of late 80s, early 90s. And next door to the Chinese restaurant where we go every Friday night to pick up some Chinese takeaway, there was a real estate agency, and I can remember peering into the window and being interested in the houses and the prices.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm not going to try and romanticise it or turn it into a fairy tale where every night I go to sleep dreaming of property or anything like that. But I had a keen interest in it. Mum and Dad were sort of very ambitious renovators of property, and they built homes and the like. So I've been around it my whole life. Mum actually worked in real estate, so I got a bit of an idea of what it was like to be in a real estate office as well. But as opposed to it being my destiny always, I was sort of falling into it more than anything else because I did so poorly at school. So any tertiary education that required a high entrance mark wasn't an option for me.
Yeah.
And, you know, I, like most young fellas, I was a pretty keen sportsman and sort of thought I might go down that road, not in terms of professional sport, but maybe sports science or something like that. And looking back now, I wouldn't have had any affinity for it either, at all. You know, me in the lab coat was never going to be a thing. Yeah. But, so I looked at property as an option, got a traineeship, working up at in Port Stephens at the Ray White office up there, straight out of school, and I want to say 97, 98, something like that.
Yeah, right.
And just went on with it from there. So it was up there for a couple of years, then came down to Newcastle, looking for bigger and better and more dynamic things, and certainly found it here in Newcastle. And then have branched out into all the other things that you're talking about, in between 2008 and 2010, and then kicked Pure Property Management off in 6 years ago. So what does that make it? 2018.
Yeah. So I guess picking up on some of that, you Port Stephens. I mean, beautiful part of the world, obviously, but probably not a property mecca from what most people would think.
Nope.
To what you're seeing now from, I guess, coming to Newcastle a lot more, and probably more recently, we've got some significant price down the resi market, but very much a commercial industrial, tilt, I guess. But the wonderful thing is, I imagine you've seen a wide range of people and come across all different kinds of people and paths to get to this point. Had
And again, if we can just go back and touch on Newcastle, I mean, it's probably now not one of the best kept secrets in Australia, given that it's had the exposure that it has, and I think it's now on the radar from an investment point of view for a lot of people, and some of the larger funds have been interested in Newcastle. But we've always known it to be a fantastic place. And even when I talk to my friends from Sydney about Newcastle, they'd sort of look at me a bit cross-eyed as to why I spoke so lovingly about the place, having lived in Sydney for a period of time. But now I think people have a greater appreciation for it. And it is an industrial city. There's no question about that. But that is where it starts and ends in terms of people who don't live in the area, their opinion about the place. But the breadth of the base, both economically and from a lifestyle point of view here, is second to none in the country, in my opinion. And I do get around a bit in terms of the places that I visit. But yeah, I don't think you get a want for more in terms of that. And then when you come back and talk about the people, we have a high concentration of high achievers here and people who have done it in a conservative yet ambitious way. And I think it's a magnificent place to sort of come through the commercial world or the business world, if you like, because there is a really small network and people are ultra accessible as well. Anybody that you want to speak to in Newcastle is only a couple of phone calls away, or a couple of introductions away. And I think that is something that maybe it's not truly unique to Newcastle, but I think it's been very, very simple here in Newcastle.
Might have to edit that part out so the people that aren't here don't realise that, mate.
No, I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
But I guess, but one of the things that off the back of that, and as you said, I think you hit on the head with Newcastle, but even in your game, and I think this is unique, not just to real estate, but business owners, in the power of relationships and what you have to do with relationships. So, I mean, when you came out of school and you just said you went straight to that Port Stephens agency.
Yes.
How'd you learn that, and how'd you just jump in there? Because for a lot of people, it's not just a natural, progression.
Sure. So, slightly funny story on that. So I was really doing nothing meaningful in that office. And what I mean by that was they needed a trainee to do the things that would make the agents more dollar productive. So they weren't out hammering in signs and doing their own letterbox drops and getting their own lunch and all those highly important and property-centric things, The way my life's going to sound like a series of stuff-ups that have me sort of landing on my feet a lot of the time. But like most young people, I was enjoying going out and living away from home and all that sort of thing. And I slept in one morning and didn't make it to the office on time. And I was told in no uncertain terms that that'd be the last time that had happened by my boss. And I actually felt a great deal of responsibility or guilt, for want of a better term, about the fact that I'd done that. So I actually asked the boss at the time, look, I was only working Monday to Friday, which is a very non-property thing, especially in the residential space. I said, look, is there something I can come and do on Saturday that then might make up for the fact that I missed 3 or 4 hours of work as a result of not getting there? And he said, oh, well, do you even own a suit? Do you own a long pair of pants, or a pair of pants and a long shirt? And I said, no, I don't, but I reckon I can arrange that by Saturday. Yeah. So I raced into somewhere really classy like Ruben F. Scarf and bought a pair of microfiber pants and the cheapest shirt I could find because budget was an issue, and rolled into sort of assisting the agents with the open homes. But I don't know I would have got that opportunity without sleeping in. Yeah.
It's funny you mention that. We talk to whether our own people or a lot of talks I give and that sort of stuff, and I say, look, I made a career on mistakes.
Yep.
And I think, I think mistakes are only stuff-ups.
Yep.
If you don't learn from it.
Yes.
And obviously a key point right there is, I've copped it on the chin, but I have learned about it, and look what happens,
I've always felt a great weight of responsibility for valuing other people's time, money and resources more than I value my own. And I don't mean that in a masochistic way, more so in as much as you've been good enough to provide me any of those 3 things that I've listed, and I need to be respectful of it at the highest possible level. And I think that's just a great ethos for life, really. If you can value the things without having any expectation of getting anything in return from others, then it's going to stand you in good stead to put yourself in positions to learn great things and have great experiences. And I've lived a very full life for that reason. Yeah, no, look, I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the key points to highlight there, and it's a common theme through nearly all of our, these interviews we do, is relationships are key. But for many business owners out there, you hold yourself back out of fear of what might go wrong, rather than, as you said, have a crack, make a mistake, learn from it, what could go right. Yes, be conscious of risk and all that, especially when your hard earns on the line. But, I think I hear it time and time again, and there's so many business owners that could, go that bit further, but they pull themselves back because of what could go wrong. But, yes. And make decisions with the best information available. You're never going to have 100 out of 100 questions answered, because that's not the way life and business and the world is going to pass you by if you're looking for an absolutely perfect outcome. You need to make the best decision you can with the information available to you.
It's a good segue. It's where we practice this, mate. But talk to me about property and information and how, I guess, you know, like where this is from any viewer, but, you know, the video and podcast is obviously aimed at business owners. So tell me how you work with business owners or people that have made their money out of business.
Sure. So if you think of me in the consultancy space, certainly, like a gun for hire, a good mate of mine refers to me as the unfair advantage, in as much as there is nothing that I don't either know directly with certainty or can't get access to the expert information in the property space. So having built that network that you've talked about, and I couldn't agree more that relationships are absolutely everything, I am constantly reminded that anyone I need is just in my phone and is only a phone call away. And what's more, and probably the thing that I'm most proud of, they actually want to answer my phone calls when I call them, because it's been one of those reciprocally beneficial arrangements over, you know, decades of time. But the support and consultancy that gets offered is we'll do everything from help somebody negotiate a retail or a commercial lease and just provide them with support and guidance around the things, the pitfalls that you wouldn't ordinarily know if you're not doing that every day in your business, through to acquiring $50 or $100 million in globo pieces of land or trying to amalgamate entire city blocks, those sorts of things. And we'll know exactly the right resources to call on. We'll know how to get the valuation support. We'll know how to work in with the banks and understand the information that they need to be provided to get comfort. And we'll also then be able to work in and position it from a timing point of view and an availability of funds point of view, an agreement between the current property owner and whoever's buying it. Or we work in advocacy for people who are selling property as well, by appointing the right agents to get the right outcome. Because not all real estate agents, just like not all medical professionals, are specialists in every single part of real estate.
Well, and like in, I guess, not just in an industry, but any walk of life, not everyone has the same values and moral compass either. And I think, you know, like everyone's got a real estate story.
Sure.
So I guess from your point of view, it's being that person that can go in and cut through a lot of the crap as well and make sure that, you know, the people are looked after.
My bullshit barometer is pretty good.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, from a business owner's point of view, and not just business owners, but let's focus on that. Really, it's having someone in your team with that specialty around all things property.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I say to people all the time that don't assume because somebody owns a property, they're an expert about property. And I think it's a trap that a lot of people fall into. We almost feel because property is the Australian obsession almost. It's the favourite topic of conversation at barbecues and social settings and all those sorts of things. But it's okay not to know everything about it. It really is. And particularly when you get out of that, you know, as overwhelming as a residential transaction is for a lot of people, when you get into things like negotiating 10 years worth of a commercial lease for your business, and you're actually in the business of creating little rubber widgets, and you really have no property, and you've done an excellent job of building a business that's turning over 10 or 20 or $30 million in revenue, it doesn't necessarily make you an expert at property. And all of the legacy aspects of a 10-year lease, make good provisions, market escalations, mid-market reviews, all of those sorts of things. If you don't have somebody in your corner that has had seat of the pants experience and had skin off their knuckles working through those things, you're at a distinct disadvantage.
Well, and as you said, it's the same as in a lot of cases. It's not necessarily what you know, but it's who you know as well. And it's that network you've built can often save people from making not only the best purchase, but sometimes prevent them from making the worst purchase too. So, yeah, no, I you know, I always have a laugh because people come in and talk tax and accounting. Oh, my mate said this, and what's your mate do?
Sure.
Oh, you know, he's a chippy.
Sure.
Look, that's great, but I think you've got it even worse because property's touching so many more people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, we refer to them as Eddie the experts. And the challenge is that in a family setting or in a friendship setting, there might be one person in a family or in a friendship circle that's the standout person in terms of their property knowledge. But it doesn't compare to the knowledge that an expert's then going to have.
Yeah.
And I think that is I always say a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, because you can sound like an expert, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got expertise to provide guidance on absolutely everything. And I also think, in defence of whomever that person might be, they get themselves into a circumstance where people come to them for general property knowledge, experience and guidance. But when it gets a bit more specialised and they don't know the answers, they're a bit more inclined just to make them up or provide an opinion that might not necessarily be the right one because they've been the go-to guy or girl for that. Yeah. And you'd be in exactly the same position.
Yeah, look, I think early on in the career, someone said to me, if you're going to invest my money, you better show me what you've done for yourself.
Sure.
And I think that's where, having that specialist such as yourself really sets apart from the people that might have read a couple of things. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think another key point, and this would go across any industry, but given property is so rife in, investment portfolios or businesses, whatever that may be for Australians, make sure you get the right advice from someone that has proven experience. Couldn't stress that enough. So again, when you come back to that work with business owners or people, in that realm within property needs.
Yes.
What is it? Do you work on fixed fees? Do you work on retainers? Do you work on one-offs? Like, how does the market work?
So we try and create a bit of because the other thing with a property deal, we can sit down and strategize to the nth degree about how it's going to look and what's going to happen. And it doesn't matter whether the property deal is for something that's a simple lease or whether it's a complex amalgamation of properties for a large development site. If those are the two, polarising ends of the process. We do try and provide a bit of a budget for the fee that would be payable, but with a clear qualification that none of us know how simple or complicated it might ultimately get, or what our chances of success ultimately are. Because unlike buying commodities, if you like, not commodities in the out of the ground sense, but or out of the crop sense, but the difference with property is that you haven't got somebody that's sitting there with a whole heap of stock like you might have in a car yard. If you're a consultant that was out there acquiring cars or selling cars for people, then there would be a very fixed market. There's a lot of frames of reference or points of reference because we're talking about almost identical stock being sold all the time.
Yeah.
And in the case of cars being sold, they're held by a single body, be it Ford, Nissan, whoever it might be. Whereas property is so much more dynamic because you've got an owner of the property that's got a whole set of needs and dreams and things that they need to get done and timings that they need to work to.
Well, and emotions.
And emotions, very much so. And even more so in the residential space, but there's still a lot of emotions attached to commercial property as well. Yeah. And then you've got the inverse of that on the other side with the purchases. So as simple as things may seem on the surface, we do need to allow ourselves a bit of bandwidth for something that becomes a bit more dynamic. And all we do is we quote a budget up front, if you like, depending on what the job might look like based on our experience with similar transactions previously. And then, when we gather more information and we're a little bit down the road, then we come back and say, okay, we're on track to meet that in terms of budget, or we've come to a bit of a crossroads where we need to decide how much further we go into this, and this is what that'll look like in terms of the cost.
At the end of the day, you're, as you referenced before, a hired gun, but you're working.
Yep.
In a commercial relationship.
Correct.
With people that want to get ahead.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I think that's, again, not to put any sort of aspersions, I guess, on an industry, etc. But like car salesmen, like accountants for that matter, they're a good and bad. But having someone understand the industry and being on the side of the
customer,
buyer,
customer, sure, yeah,
that's pretty refreshing.
It is, and it's obviously we've established some positioning so that we can actually provide that service. But can I stick up for, or probably put a leveler in the real estate industry in terms of the people that work in it, and provide a bit of clarity that I think might help the business owner or the listeners or viewers? The vast majority of people that work in the property industry are good, hard-working people that are interested in going out there, making $1 and doing so with the highest of integrity and providing the highest service that they are capable of putting out there into the marketplace. You're always going to hear the horror stories, just like you're going to with stockbrokers or used car yards or bakeries or whatever it might be, restaurants, whatever it might be. The real estate industry or real estate agents are held to a particularly high level of expectation, and I don't think that that's fair for the following reason. The job or role of the real estate agent is to bring buyer and seller together at the highest possible price and the best possible outcome for the client that they represent, which is the owner. If they can do that whilst also nurturing the emotional and commercial journey for the purchaser, all the better for them, because it allows them to go and build that great reputation out there in the marketplace and all the rest of it. But fundamentally, their job is to try and achieve that very best outcome for the person that they represent. Buyers, in a lot of cases, have this expectation that the real estate agent is there to look after and represent them. And the agent, because they care very much about making it a stress-free process or as stress-free as a process as possible for the buyer, they'll do their absolute best for that. But the buyer, generally speaking, will have a very, very selective recollection when they retell the story about whatever they believe the real estate agent did wrong for them or wrong to them about what actually occurred. That's been my experience, because in the auction space, I get to see this all the time. The thing that I love most about auctions, if we can just segue into that for a second, it takes away all of the afters in terms of the stories that get told about buyers that were hard done by in a transaction because they were beaten to the punch by somebody else.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, the story that I get told is, well, the real estate agent obviously had somebody else that they wanted to sell it to. They had a friend that they wanted to sell it to. This is not based on any fact. This is just the sentiment that they felt. The beauty with the auctions is that everybody has the same opportunity to go out there and buy it. But I've even had circumstances, and I've told this story a number of times, and it sticks in my head to this very day. I was in Coles at the junction one day, and I'm talking on my phone, stumbling around aimlessly because I'm hopeless when I'm in a supermarket. Don't ever send me to do your shopping, because I'll be there for 3 hours to get the most simple of things. But I had somebody, I'm just walking down the bread aisle, just talking, trying to work out where the Helga's bread or whatever it might have been was. And a bloke has literally grabbed me by the collar as I'm walking along. I was on the phone, I'd said, look, I'm probably not talking to my wife, so I'm going to have to call you back. And I turned around, this guy says to me, do you remember me? I said, look, I'm sorry, I don't. He said, come on, have a good hard look. Do you remember me? I said, look, I don't. He said, mate, it was an auction. I said, I figured it would be. I said, which one was it? He goes, come on, you must remember. I said, mate, I don't. He said, oh, Walls End. I said, oh, was it Smith Street, Walls End? It started to come back to me ever so slightly. But it wasn't actually because I remembered him, because it was a bloody freezing morning. We were out there at 9 o'clock doing this auction. Anyway, he says to me, mate, you cost me at least 50 grand that day. I said, okay. I said, how do you figure that? He said, well, you kept asking the other guy to increase his bid. He said, they would have sold to me for much less. I said, okay, that may very well be the case. I said, from memory, there was a buyer's agent there. I said, it was just you and one other guy, because it did start to come back to me. Once, it might have been 6 or 12 months before. And he said, yep, that was it. The buyer's agent was there. He was talking to somebody on the phone. I said, okay, great. I said, so you're annoyed that the auctioneer, me, was asking for more money on behalf of the seller. And he said, yep, you could have sold it to me much cheaper. I said, okay. I said, here's what I want you to think about. And he was in an absolute rage, this bloke. I said, one day I'll be out the front of your property and I'll be asking people to pay as much money as the market's prepared to pay so that we can maximise the outcome for you. And I want you to put yourself in that position and ask yourself, what would you want me to do differently compared with what I did the day that you bought the property? And his whole face changed. His whole expression changed. There was no aggression. But he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, mate, I'm so sorry. He said, I've stewed on that since that auction day. knowing that I'd run into you, and I was looking so forward to it, to have this exact discussion with you. He said, I've been waiting for it, and here it is. He said, I feel so terrible that I carried it around for so long. But people's recollection of the transaction is such that they'll remember it in the way that, they might have a negative attachment to it or a very positive attachment to it. But I believe the majority of property professionals are out there doing a great job.
Yeah, and as I said at the start, my point is every industry is going to have the same. I think it's just more that so many people attached to property, because they're either live in it, they rent it,
sure,
they want it, they can't have, it is a topic, as you said, of conversation at barbecues, at pubs, at wherever it may be. It's always on, the mind of so many people.
Whether it's wealth creation or whether it's just somewhere to hang your hat each night,
yep.
It is stitched into our lives.
And that whole, as you said, supply and demand argument, where we've come in, take not just Newcastle, but Australia generally in the last, 5 years, and a very interesting time at the moment. It's constantly daily conversations. So I guess then that comes into my next point around, everyone loves property.
Yes.
For different reasons, as we said. But why do you think that is? Not, the obvious, but why do you think that is, from whether that be an investment class or just, a better place to live? Like, what is the affinity? Because it's not every country or not every culture has that same view.
So I want to make a clear divergence here between the lifestyle choice, between where you choose to live and the style of property that you choose to live in, versus why I think it's such a powerful investment tool from a commercial perspective. Because people ask all the time, they're trying to keep particularly people that are involved in commercial property, they've got this internal turmoil over, do I go and spend $100,000 X on upgrading my property, or $1 million X on going to upgrade my property? And they ring me just completely tying themselves in knots over the whole thing. And I've been on this journey myself. It is a tough decision to decide, especially when you understand the value of the dollar and what it's taken to actually make that money, to then go and putting it into something which is essentially for your enjoyment. You've got to make a clear separation between those two choices. If you are making something that's going to improve yours and a decision that's going to improve yours and your family's life, there is no tangible value that can be attached to that.
Good point, yeah.
Any capital growth that you then experience in that is just a great thing for the family's future.
And to be fair, that's only if you ever intend to move on from that.
Totally. And any growth that occurs in the markets that you might be investing in from a family home point of view, that equity might allow you to go and do other things in business, but that should be the byproduct. It shouldn't be the ultimate choice or the reason that you're making that decision to go and buy the family home, move closer to the beach, move to the country, acquire those lifestyle aspects that are going to improve the general amenity lifestyle for you and your family. That should be a very, very separate choice. But from a commercial point of view, I think your question was, why do people like property, or why is it such a passion for Australians, in the investment sense? Because I'd say it's the largest outside of super. Would be the largest, and even some of the super funds are heavily exposed, right. So either directly or indirectly, people are quite exposed to property. I think the bricks and mortar aspect of it is very attractive to people. And what I mean by that is that it's very real, it's tangible, you can actually drive past it and keep an eye on it. I think as much as all decisions should be made in an algorithmic way or a mathematical way about your investment strategies, there is an emotional aspect to it. It's not robots investing, it is humans. So the fact that you can drive past it, see it, and there is also a human element to it, where if you own residential property, it's somewhere for other people to live as well. If you're renting those properties out, I think that's a nice byproduct of the strength of the residential investment market. With commercial property, notwithstanding the COVID hangover, work from home, flexible work arrangements, the feedback that I categorically get from the majority of business owners is that the highest productivity that they get out of their teams is when they are in the office and working collaboratively. I accept that there'll be some exceptions to the rule, and there'll be some exceptions in terms of the way individual staff work best or individual team members work best. But being able to pull, certainly in dynamic businesses that have got a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, which is a lot of people that we work with, them being able to work collaboratively in the one space and be able to mentor and grow their teams through the osmosis kind of learning, seeing and hearing what's going on in the office environment is not to be underestimated. And certainly, you can't run a manufacturing business from home. You can't mine coal from home. You can't build buildings from home. So in those sorts of industries, and particularly here in Newcastle, where there is such a big exposure to all of those sorts of things that we're talking about, there is a real need for those sorts of spaces in terms of the commercial, industrial, retail, medical. You can't do heart surgeries from home. You can't operate on...
You could try.
You could. You could. But for all of those reasons, it is a particularly strong place to be. I know that there was a bit of sentiment in the market during COVID that there'd be this huge rollback and enormous vacancy rates particularly for commercial office space. It just hasn't happened anywhere near to the extent that was being predicted.
Well, I think that's a matter of the fad that comes in, and then people realise, well, hang on, careful what you wish for, because it's also the health side of things. I don't think it's healthy for people to be in that one place. And where does the lines blur between what is personal, what is life, what is family versus what is work?
Yes. And just touching back on the commercial space, if you will, and it's no different in the residential, but it's probably the most easy to demonstrate in the commercial, retail, industrial, medical space. Just in the non, let's just call it the non-residential assets, if you like. What people love about it, especially people that have got really good at property investing, and it's just a series of patterns duplicated, like most things in life, is that commercial real estate or non-residential real estate is entirely, or the value or growth in it is entirely demonstrated or articulated, if you like, or benefited from by being able to go in and add value to that. Turn it from what it is now into what it's going to be. Find a way to add value to it by bringing new ideas to it, by repositioning it, by taking it from use A to use B, and therefore being able to get a better tenant in that's going to pay slightly more rent or is going to commit to a longer lease, those sorts of things. So it allows you to not necessarily be creative, but as opposed to the more residential thinking, which is just a set and forget, or a more of a buy and, they call it a buy and hold. I refer to it as a buy and hope strategy, which is the hope for growth, right? It allows you, that non-residential space allows you that opportunity to force a bit of your own thinking on it, force a bit of your own value on it, and then reposition things and benefit from the growth that comes in turn.
Yeah, no, I mean, we could talk about the days and weeks on end, the different asset class and the rest of it. I think in my experience, especially with clients, a lot of people will go resi because it's that factor that they've got an awareness, so they've got some experience. They might necessarily know everything, but that's where they've got their comfort, they've done it before. Versus commercial can be a very good asset class. They can do a lot more with, rather than just that, as you said, hold and hope sort of strategy. And that's where they can rely on people like yourselves to go, well, let's come up with a strategy and make sure we plan, as we would with a business.
Yes.
Actually plan for an outcome as opposed to a hope strategy.
I think that's an excellent point. And so if you were to sort of put the truth serum in somebody's arm and ask them why they've chosen residential over a commercial asset, it would be on the basis that there is more certainty around the property being re-tenanted if it ever became vacant. That seems to be the main thing, but what if I lost the tenant? What if the tenant was lost? That is certainly a consideration for any of the non-residential asset classes, as opposed to us trying to list them off. But when you buy the asset, even if it is tenanted, if you hallucinate about the day that it does actually become vacant, and think about either the way that you would reposition it at that time, or the tenant that would move straight back in to whatever the existing improvements are on the site, and have a strategy for that, then it shouldn't be something that holds you back from then investing in commercial real estate. It's just a matter of thinking past the immediate income, because that's as far as most people get. We find this a lot with people who invest in commercial property in their self-managed super funds. They buy it based on the yield, which is great, but they never turn their mind to when it becomes vacant. So if you've got a building which is very, very client or tenant centric, it's very, the fit out is extremely specific to that tenant, then there's a high likelihood you're going to experience a long period of vacancy. But if it's a industrial shed in Steel River that's got a colour-bond roof and tilt-up slab walls and is nice and open, then there are a multitude of different users that are going to slot straight back into that. So if you just assume that over the life of your the tenure that you have with the property, that you are going to experience some vacancy, but you've got a strategy for actually getting tenants back in there, I think that's the approach that you need to take, because certainly the returns are significantly better.
Oh, and absolutely. And it's literally looking at, you go, limited resources, what's my risk around it, and start to strategize. So.
Totally. Totally.
So I guess I want to flick this in a minute, but it'd be remiss of us not to sit here in a property conversation, not talk about the market.
Sure.
And I mean, we're sitting here early in 2023, and we've had rate rise after rate rise. What is it? 9 consecutive months or something like that. Another one yesterday. Thank you.
3.35. Here we go.
Yeah. So a lot of people, I guess, have not only now worried, but they're worried about something they don't understand, because they've never experienced, a massive generation, never experienced anything around interest rates that we're at now. And it's funny, when you talk to people like my father or other people that have been in business and own property, and they're like, nothing, I used to pay 23%, and the rest of it's all relative, I get it. But, we've got that going on. We've got probably a bit of a slowdown if you read the media on I know sales around us are still pretty active, but you have seen death serious slowdown, and in different markets outside of Newcastle, you got a lot of people worry about mortgage stress. I'm not painting a very good picture, am I? But property goes in cycles all the time. With the talk of recession, what do you think about the market, and for people looking at the market and making decisions? What is a bit of advice that you apply, not just in the current, but what you've seen in cycles?
My very first bit of advice is don't listen to the media. The media, their whole reason for being is to sensationalise whatever it is that they can. That is their core reason to wake up every single day. When have you ever read a headline that said, property market doing okay? Property market stable? It's not going to sell newspapers. And the other thing that I've noticed with all of my exposure to the press, journalists, and particularly their commentary around property, is that whenever they're talking about something, they're reporting on historic information, which is no longer current as at up to the minute kind of information. So when the media starts to report on the fact that the market's at its absolute peak and fever pitch and this is happening, you can almost be guaranteed that we're about to see a slowdown. There's like this inverse relationship between what the media have to say about what's going on in the market and what's actually happening out there. Now, obviously, the property market is a pretty slow-moving beast and takes its time to do its thing. But the other advice that I'd offer you about the property market more generally is that if you are investing in property, it's not like buying a stock that you're going to be in today and out of tomorrow. The way you need to approach every single one of your property transactions, or one of the questions that you need to ask yourself every single time, is, what does this look like in a decade? Because the reality is that property is a decade investment. The entry and exit costs are too high for it not to be. If stamp duty gets abolished, this might be a different thing. People might be in and out of property a little bit more frequently, but why would the government aren't going to do that? There might be some...
They've got to pay for things still.
They've got to pay for things. We live in a beautiful country with great things, and all that costs money. And that's where all of our stamp duty dollars, we hope, goes. But you really do need to take a longer term view of it. So, I mean, there are people that I spoke to that would have bought at the absolute top of the market and have subsequently got back in contact with me, just, the friends or friends of friends, and they're quite worried about it because, the media is beating things up and saying prices down, 11%, since date X or whatever it might have been. But I say, okay, well, are you in a circumstance, as some people will be, where you need to sell the property today? I said, well, no, we love it here. So, well, you don't need to concern yourself with this in that case, because like you said, it is cyclical, and things will find their level, and then there'll be a rebuild.
Yeah, it's nearly similar. You referred to before superannuation.
Sure.
And people, don't be wrong, my parents do this, but a lot of people living off their income will look day to day and go, my super's dropped. But they're long-term plays.
Yes. And that's that is absolutely the way that and look, there's always going to be the exception to the rule. We could talk about the person who bought a property in 2020 for $2 million and sold it for $17 million in 2023. Those stories are going to get told, and that is more akin to a share trade. There's no question about that. I'm not saying you must hold every single property that you purchase for a period of 10 years, but have one of the, if you're putting it through your own personal matrix, ask yourself the decade question every single time, because I think it's a really measured way to look at it.
Yeah, and I guess that's the not a message we want to sway people, but deal with facts. I think that's one of the key things that you've just said, and that's for same as we say to business owners: deal with the information.
Yes.
Don't deal in hearsay or gut feel. Don't be wrong. People are always going to make a call.
Sentiment's an important thing to talk about. I think that's probably worthwhile. If we want to just have a bit of a snapshot in time as we sit here at the 8th of February, 2023. So 2022 was a year of absolute consolidation. There's no question about that. I mean, we did, just if we can go back to the auctioneering space, and this is why I love auctioneering, but I also love the exposure and knowledge that it gives me, up to the minute in the marketplace. 2022, we did fewer auctions than we did in 2021, but 2021, the market was just as vicious as I've ever seen it in terms of the buyer demand outstripping supply by such a significant amount. And the way that we track that is in terms of registrations per auction. It was higher than what we'd seen over the average year on year for the business by 500%. It was quite remarkable. 2022 was a year of consolidation. We came into the early part of 2022, people still had their tails up a bit. There were people that had sold at the end of 2021, still needed to get into properties, and there was that rollover of people that were transacting because they had to. As the talk around interest rates and a slowing economy started to come, certainly people started to become more conservative. But to your point before, even at the RBA rate at 3.35%, it's still something which is very manageable in the context if we look at it over a decade or even 20 years of what interest rates have done. It's the principal amount of people's loans that has changed, and that's the thing that's causing some concern. And people have never had to, some people who are in the property market now have never even contemplated the sort of interest rates that we're currently dealing with, but they're probably going to need to get their heads around it, adjust their lifestyle and those sorts of things. We are not finding that we are doing mortgagee in possession, receiver, administrator sales at this point in time. We have not seen that flow through. But in a more traditional market, we'd be seeing that as maybe 1 in 20 of the sales that we were involved in. We're just not seeing that. Very infrequently we're seeing that occur. So if that's still to come, as people come off their fixed interest rates, and maybe some of the businesses in industries which aren't quite as bullish in terms of the way that they're being supported at the moment by their customers. And you'll be the one to talk to exactly what those industries might be and what you see in your business in terms of those that suffer as things fall closer to or get into those recessionary type environments. But we're not seeing that at the moment. But what we are seeing is that people are less certain about making decisions about purchasing. And that's manifesting itself in one of two ways, and the two ways compound. Either they're just not out looking, or when they are looking, the things that they are saying more often than not is, we'll just see what happens, which is code for, I'm not certain that I'm making the right decision. And they're saying that time and time and time again. Yeah. Everyone's using a different expression for it, but we'll just wait and see what happens. I just want to see what happens with interest rates. And the reality is, those who are being a bit scientific about it, and this is the thing, I don't think people really are being scientific about it and actually working out what that means tangibly in terms of, well, what does this mean for the mortgage I'm about to commit to in terms of my serviceability? How much more out of pocket am I going to be every week? They're just hearing this negative talk around interest rates and the fact that that is causing cost of living stress for people and applying that to themselves. I don't want to be stressed. I don't need any more stress in my life.
Or as you said, listen to the wrong people.
Listen to the wrong people.
Yeah.
Or just taking it as, I won't be able to afford it, as opposed to sitting there with a calculator or having somebody like their broker or their financial advisor or coming to an accountant. And maybe this is less of an issue for most business people because they're having to work through financial modelling quite a bit. But the average consumer out there isn't making the sentiment or the imagination in their head around what it's like real in terms of putting it into numbers.
No, I don't. Look, I think it's a very good point, not just in property, but in business general, because most, there's a stat in Australia that about 70%, thereabouts, of business owners fail in their first 2 years for these exact reasons. They do act off emotion. They do act off, lack of information. That's the thing. So I couldn't agree with that more. And I think, if we had to summarise that, you're saying, look, the market's been here for a long time. It's going to be here for a lot longer than we're going to be here.
Yes.
There's still transactions going. It's deal with facts, deal with info. I like what you said. Don't watch the media.
Well, no, I'm not saying don't. Again, you've got something in front of you. I'm not saying avert your eyes and ignore it. But understand what the media's positioning is. Understand what the journalist's job is, and that is to sell papers. They sell that under the pretense of information, but a sensationalised story is what gets you to pick it up. If you are looking for data to base your information on, there is so much of it available on the internet that you can go out there. Get it from CoreLogic, get it from realestate.com and Domain, because there's some raw data there that'll be particularly helpful for you. One of the other observations that I would make that your audience might be interested in is that out there in the auction world, and this is something that's happened in the latter part of last year, but we've really noticed it. We've only been back for a couple of weeks this year doing the auctions, is that the buyers, as much as they have come back in force, is that they are being very disciplined with their limits. As in when they get to the auctions, they are setting a limit and they are sticking to it.
Yeah, not being budged.
And it was them budging each other. I think there's much more stoic conversations happening at home before people get to the auctions about where they're setting their limits, as opposed to getting there and sort of elbowing each other in the ribs and saying, how about just another $5,000 or just another $50,000, depending on the price range you're buying in. That's something that we've really, really been aware of. And again, it's not a huge sample in terms of the time that we've been back at it, but it's been a very, very standout observation of the auctions that we've been conducting this year, just as a bit of an anecdotal thing. And I guess the reason that I mention that, for anybody that's got their property in the market or is going to be selling in the next 12 months, I would encourage you to look strongly at whatever the market is bringing you, regardless of whether you choose to sell by auction or whether you just go for sale at a price, because people are being very, very real and disciplined with their budget. So if you're starting to get offers, pay a little bit more attention to them than you might have previously. Yep. Because if your offers are there or thereabouts today, I'm a big believer in a bird in the hand, allowing you to get onto your next adventure.
Yeah, very good advice. And I think that's the same as a lot of people in many investments or shares are a great one when they look and go, but what if there's that bit more? And it's like, well, hang on. If you were happy with that before, take that viewpoint. So
yes.
I want to flick it completely and talk a bit more about your business. I mean, You've been very generous with your time. So a couple more questions, Bub. You've got an obvious passion there and obvious expertise, and people pay for that expertise. They want Gavan per se. But how have you turned that into a business? Because a business is going to be more than just you. So taking a passion and making the business.
Sure. So, the challenge is, I guess, there's businesses in the auctioneering, the consultancy, and then the commercial asset management as well with Pure. With the auctioneering business, it's been a matter of bringing the right people on and coaching and training the skill as the business has grown there. In the first year, I think I did 27 auctions myself when it was just I was a one-man band and thought I was really busy. And I think in the best year that the business had, we sort of nudged 2,000 auctions. So, as much as people will try one person can't do that. I mean, it gets a bit Groundhog Day-ish at the best of times, but we've managed to bring great people into the business, and also then I've got an auction manager, Karen, who looks after all of the client side stuff, coordinating our diaries and those sorts of things, because we just couldn't do it ourselves.
So, delegation and
delegation and putting the right people in that are, again, understand the value of the relationships that we've got with our clients, and can provide that support that doesn't necessarily mean that it's us being, or me personally being the rat in the wheel and completely wearing myself out. So the auctioneering skill is not something that you sort of fall out of the sky with. It can be coached, and it's something that is just a matter of having what auctioneering ultimately is being able to assist people with the conversation that they're having with themselves that they just can't quite get to a resolution on. It's not just about the noise and the numbers. It really is around supporting people's decisions. And that's just the way that we coach it with the guys that we've had come into the business.
It's not just being on the block.
It's not just being on the block. As I said to somebody the other day, they need to rename reality TV unreality TV, because the block is not real life. It's not. I mean, about 40% of the auctions we do, we just have one single registration. 40%. That wouldn't make great TV. To our conversation about the journalists and the newspapers and everybody else, it's entertainment after all, right? Flipping over to the consultancy business, that's certainly been something where it is a little bit more, because it's a more specialist skill, if you like. I've got excellent support in there from an administration point of view, which has allowed us to again scale and delegate in the business. But it's also, I've got this army of expert consultants behind us as well. Everything from construction site superintendents to builders and trades to accountants to all of those sorts of things, that when people come and it is not it's not information that's in my wheelhouse, then we're able to immediately create that connection.
So, I guess I was going to say connectivity and making sure that network really plays in it.
Totally. And then in the asset management business, that's obviously something which has been much more simple to scale, because we look after assets in that business, and we've got offices spread up and down the East Coast from Maroochydore to Melbourne at the moment. We're even looking after stuff in Darwin and Townsville and all sorts of different locations. We've been very, very concentrated there on being able to produce a business model which has that very personalised level of service, but allows those same skills to be duplicated anywhere in the country. If you had assets that we needed then to manage in Perth next week, and there was a cluster of them, I could drop a team of 3 people in there, and we would know exactly how to do it and get it done, because we built the model. Every conversation we have in the business is about scale, but it's also about scale without that loss of personalised service, because I think that's one of the big challenges that a lot of businesses have got. They reach that point where it goes from being a family type enterprise to being something which is more an HR business, because you're just managing, regardless of which business you're in, it becomes a human resources exercise, especially in the services space.
Yeah, and I think the key thing, and most business owners, when they start out, they're good at something, but don't get taught how to run business. And why I want to challenge you on that question was, realistically, you are Reynolds in your name, but also it's a skill set you bring. That's what you're selling. So being able to leverage that kind of business shows many other businesses that it should be half the challenge to start to leverage. But it is having process and systems. It is having the right people educated and developed.
Yes.
And then being able to delegate with making sure the communication's there.
Yes. And the auction business is probably the one that's at the furthest end of the scale in terms of the specialisation of the skill, and people wanting an individual, if you like. But the reality is that for any business owner, you want to be able to have the business function without your direct input 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Otherwise, what are we doing all this for if there isn't that opportunity
It's a constant job, isn't it?
It certainly is. So again, investing in those people that are going to be the future of your business is everything.
Yep.
Regardless of how specialised you believe your skill is, you need to get out there and spend the time. Regardless of how busy you are, the busyness is only going to get more exacerbated as opposed to get more relieved. I mean, how could I ever go and race my car ever if there weren't other people to support me in the business? You finish up being a slave to the business and its clients. And that's not to say that they've done anything wrong. You as the business owner haven't made the conscious choice that you want your life and the service, the breadth of service you provide to the people that you look after to be at a point where you've actually got that scale on it. You need to make that choice. And for a long time, I hadn't. It was only me getting there and thinking to myself, I need the balance to be better here.
Yep.
But you've got to make that choice.
Couldn't agree more. And I think, the key thing about, what a business is, well, it's not a one person, and that's the killer for valuation too. So.
Yeah, I mean, you can call it a business, and it can have a PTY Ltd company and an ABN, but if ultimately you're an overpaid employee of something that you're going to call your business, that's not truly a business. No. You're not scaling that skill, and I think that's imperative.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I guess final one for me, and I always ask our guests, but I'll call it your best. You might say your hardest, or really one yet look in the mirror. But what was one of the best lessons you've learned in this business journey?
I am an optimist by blueprint, and I guess it's only after the fact and after you sort of make all those mistakes that sort of things resonate with you a bit more. You probably heard the expression that when the student is ready, the master will appear. I heard a quote from Elon Musk that was something along the lines of, wishful thinking is a dangerous thing. And I don't ever want to change this about myself, but believing that people have your best interests at heart, or believing that somebody will approach things with balance and integrity, is something that I'm probably a bit more aware of now. And it's not anything that, I mean, there'd be a bunch of things that we could drill down on specifically in terms of instances, but I'm probably just a little bit more aware of that now. I'll always, still to this day, give people an opportunity and believe that they have everybody's best interests at heart. But I think that you want to make decisions or choices in business and in life generally based on, try and be as scientific about it as you possibly can. And that's where I think, great accountants that can do forecasting and all of those sorts of things, all of that is super important. That's why I can't stress enough to anybody that is listening, get in, don't just try and look at things in the rear view mirror. Try and get out in front of it and try and be a bit strategic about the way that you're planning things. But coming back to what I'm referencing in terms of being a bit more balanced with your optimism, if you like. I don't want people to be pessimistic either at the other end of the scale. But don't assume that because you know the whole story about something, it'll be retold with that accuracy. Don't expect people to, by default, act with that high level of integrity and be out there and be recalling things with that same accuracy. So if I'm to try and, again, summarise that, just be optimistic, be positive, be energetic in your businesses. But if the warning signs are there, look at them and focus on them. Don't stick your head in the sand and want to believe that it's only going to be a positive outcome. Contemplate an outcome which isn't perfect.
Yeah, it's very good advice, and I think that's you can take that a number of different directions from a point of view of when you're entering assets or when something doesn't feel right.
Yes.
Very good. Thanks for being honest. I guess, mate, really enjoyed this. We could keep going for a long time. But I will start to bring in some of the key points I got in there. I mean, not on property. You're the expert on property. I think the one thing I'll say about property, the most successful people in the world don't know everything. They surround themselves with, people that do in their particular specialty. And I'd say you've proven that today with, from your point of view of property. If anyone is in that property space, someone like Gavan can really help strategize as you would in business. To me, really, when you've got a passion, make sure that, as you said, you remain optimistic, but you take that passion, you be aware, but you also then have a plan and try and get leverage in that in your business so that it's your passion can be survive longer than you maybe, or even outside of you, so you can have a lifestyle. To me, you really spoke about it relates to commercial property and residential too. It's same as in business. Have a strategy. Relationships, absolutely imperative. So if you're stuck in your business and you're not doing any of that, you need to really look at that and build it up. And then more so, the connections you make off that. As you said, you need to go to your phone to make sure that you can get the advice people are after or the support. And the key thing that I'll take on that property aspect that you started on the market is really cycles come and go. It's still a good class of asset. I'll have a cheeky dig and say don't listen to the media, but as you said, it's not don't listen, it's don't sensationalise and make sure we look at facts. No different to in business, So, there's a lot of other key messages there, mate. But I'll probably forget most of them, and we could go through this again. But it is a topic of dead set interest because there's so many people touching property and real estate and that in Australia, and I appreciate thoroughly the insight you've given us. There's so much more to go through, and no doubt we might have to follow this up with another one to touch on a bit more specifics. But thanks for coming on. Give a plug. What are the sites for the businesses people can go onto?
So Pure Property Management is purepm.com.au, Reynolds Auctions.com.au for the auction business, and Reynolds Property for the consultancy needs.
Beautiful. So all things property, check it out. Hopefully you got a lot out of this. Gavin, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Andrew.
Until next time, cheers.